course. So until World War II, geography was what determined economic success. You had to have access to certain points. You had to fortify your borders in certain ways, like behind mountains. In the case of Russia specifically, they've got 9 gateways to their territories, and they've been invaded through them 50 times. So what Putin's trying to do right now is plug the gateways. 2 of them, unfortunately, are on the other side of Ukraine. Now, when World War II ended, the United States told everyone that geography no longer exists. We're going to protect everyone. We're going to allow for trade among everyone, and that is what gave us free trade in the world that we know. But we did that to buy up an alliance to fight the Cold War. Cold War ended 30 years ago. We've been edging away ever since. And in the last 8 presidential elections, we voted for the guy who wanted to move away from free trade and globalization. The exception, of course, is this last one, where there was not a pro-free trader running. So that's kind of piece 1. Piece 2 is demography. Everything that you do is determined by your age. When you're 20 years in your 30s, you're having kids. When you're 50s, you're saving for retirement. Well, the whole world has aged as we urbanized and industrialized under globalization. Well, 70 years on, we now have a number of countries, Russia included, that has more people in their 60s than their 50s, than their 40s, than their 30s, and their teens. So the return to geography explains the why of what Russia's doing, and its collapsing demography explains the why now. If they don't do it now, they'll never be able to.
Yeah, but you know, closing off their borders, I mean, where was the threat of invasion? Who was invading?
Today there isn't one, but like I said, they've been invaded 50 times, and they know if they don't plug those gaps now, they will lack the military to do it in the future. They're just preparing for the next major conflagration, because they know next time they won't be able to fight a general war.
A calculated decision that they're vulnerable?
A calculated decision, and all the rhetoric that he has used in the last week, he has used before. It's just been a while. He had some rather colorful things to say about the Chechens when he first became president back in the early 2000s.
Anything for you?
Actually, in my second book, The Absent Superpower, there's a whole chapter called The Twilight War on Russia doing exactly this, as well as the next 5 countries that he's going to invade, which I think we can look forward to later this year.
So you don't think this will stop at Ukraine?
No, absolutely not. He's not going to stop until he plugs all 9 of the gateways, and even if he secures Ukraine totally, he still needs to move further. Moldova, Romania, Poland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. He'll need parts or all of them. Nobody expected Ukraine to fall within a month. They did what they call some thunder runs, thinking they might get lucky on Kiev. That failed. They're now fighting this Russian style with heavy artillery until the city is leveled. They're going to do that over and over again. It's going to take them over a month. Probably no more than 6, though. Then there'll be an insurgency. The Russians know how to deal with that as well. So from the Russian point of view, sure, this hasn't been all sunshine and chocolate, but it's kind of par for the course for how they fight wars. The sanctions did surprise him. The sanctions surprised me. I think the sanctions have surprised everyone. I don't think anyone thought the Europeans were going to get this stiff-backed so quickly. And he was certainly thinking that he was going to have more time and more flexibility. And I don't mean to suggest he's done. If you look at the pipeline infrastructure going from Russia to Europe, there are a couple of undersea pipelines that no one can disrupt, that you don't have to get insurance from. You don't have to worry about a shipper or a Ukrainian sapper. They're going to be the last ones to go. And the only way they'll go is if the Turks and the Germans directly sanction those projects. That's the only weak point they have. So we're going to be moving into an era here within a month where the Russians can directly and accurately go to Berlin and go to Ankara and say, look, we can leave the lights on for you, but everyone else is screwed. There's a price, of course. Bag at this point. We're going to lose 5 million barrels per day of Urals crude within the next few weeks, and somewhere between 5 and 10 BCF of natural gas going to Europe. We're going to have a food crisis by the 4th quarter because the world's largest wheat exporter just invaded the 5th largest one. There isn't going to be any planting season in Ukraine this year. We have a phosphate fertilizer shortage because of what's going on in China. Because of natural gas prices, we now have a global nitrogen fertilizer shortage. And Russia and Belarus combined are the world's largest potash producers. So a lot of farmers the world over are not going to use fertilizer this year. So we'll have a collapse in yields. That is how a famine begins. Global wheat stores are less than 5 weeks of usage. conservatively, between what's going on in Russia and Ukraine and what's going on in the fertilizer markets, the price of wheat between now and the end of the year is going to quadruple. The reference that Jacob made about what happened in the Middle East was when in one region it tripled. We're talking a global quadrupling. In the places that are more exposed to these producers, it'll be significantly worse. So yes, some degree of political unrest that is significantly worse than anything that we have seen with the Arab Spring is baked in now for the entirety of the Middle East. I'd also be a little bit worried about India and Pakistan. I'm horrified about what's going to happen in China because China is facing a complete food cycle collapse because of the combination of African swine flu and now what's happening with the Russians.
Crash,
So
is that what you said?
3 years ago, the Chinese were infected with African swine fever, and they ended up culling more of their hogs than the world's commercial farms have. They're now trying to rebuild it, but almost all the people who came in to rebuild have no experience in farming, and they have never gotten rid of African swine fever. So when you want to build up a herd of hogs that are in the tens of the millions, there isn't enough fodder. So what the Chinese have been doing is buying food from everywhere, even things that are wildly inappropriate, not just corn from Iowa, but broken rice from India, and even food grade wheat, like croissant grade wheat from France, anything they can find. That's what's drawn everything down. And it's all going to be wasted because they never got rid of the disease in the first place. So the Chinese have decided that all that is left, the only thing they can guarantee is rice. So they've pulled all the phosphate off the market, phosphate that the rest of the world needs for other fertilizer. So we're going on to a mono-food system in the world's single largest population with an economy that is dependent upon globalization, and globalization is going away. There's no way this ends well for the Chinese. It's absolutely a political risk, and I'm not sure that they do have the tools anymore. They might have them on paper. They might actually have the policies in place. They may even have the infrastructure. But one of the things we've learned about Xi in the last year is he's become so paranoid and insular, and he's literally shot the messenger so many times that no one wants to bring him bad news. So I think the best example of that manifesting as policy is the power outages that started last May. Best guess, he didn't find out about them until September. We didn't get our first real policy to deal with them until 2 weeks ago. And if you've got a one-man shop, a cult of personality, and the bureaucrats are afraid to bring clashing policy priorities back to the boss, the whole thing breaks down. We're certainly seeing that with their COVID policy. And of course, it doesn't help that their vaccine doesn't really work.
Talk about a destabilizing factor for the global economy. What can we imagine what the financial implications are from that?
Finance is not my bailiwick, but I can hit it from the resource side, no problem.
Yeah, but give me anything you got, Peter.
Sure. So right now, what's going on in the Black Sea and in the Baltic Sea with Russian crude is we're not dealing with a sanctions situation. What we're dealing with is whenever a country shoots at civilian shipping, as Russia has done, every maritime indemnity insurance for every vessel is null and void. So the vessels have to vacate. So we have seen probably 3.5 million barrels of Urals crude a day for the last 3 days just not get picked up. Yeah. It's not a boycott. It's not sanctions. It's insurance companies and shippers and ship captains just refusing to go there at all. And as long as this is a hot war, this is where it's going to be. So you should take any crude that was coming out of Primorsk near Petersburg or Novorossiysk on the Black Sea and just write it off. The same thing is happening for the Tengiz-Chevroil project on the Caspian and Kazakhstan, not because the Kazakhs have joined sides here, but all that crude goes to Novorossiysk as well. No one's picking it up, so it's all backing up in the pipelines. The Russians only have 80 million barrels of storage. So at current rates, you're talking less than 2 months before they have to start shutting in production. Yeah. The last time they shut in production, it took them 30 years to bring it back online. So we're not talking here about Urals going away for a week or a month. We're talking years, taking the single largest crude grade in the world and just removing it. 5% drop, we haven't seen that in relative terms since World War II. Yeah. And if you are in Europe and you were the primary user of Urals, you now have to get crude somewhere else. The next best bet for them is West Africa because they're all former colonies and there's a security and political and economic relationship. They can do that. They can pull that off. But that means none of it's going to China. So China is kind of the last man in the kick line here for all the resources disruptions that are happening, all the energy disruptions, all the food disruptions. They gave Russia, from Russia's point of view, a blank check, and now they're having to cash it, and it is not going to end well.